Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 183, The Fall of the Borgias, 1503 to 1507.
E così ritorno su, lascio I colli nelle valli, tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
We last left Cesare Borgia after having got his revenge on his rebellious captains and back in full control of the situation. Now, he seemed even more unstoppable. Assisi and Orvieto were attacked and sacked. Città di Castello, which had been ruled over by the assassinated Vitellozzo Vitelli, surrendered to Borgia without a fight. Incidentally, Città di Castello is where one of our wonderful Patreon supporters has a house, so you could say that we, of the A History of Italy friends and family, are setting up a power base in central Italy. Hello, Alexander. If you want to organize a big party there, we'll all be happy to come. The same thing as Città di Castello also happened with Perugia, where Giampaolo Baglioni had been lord until recently. He, at least, was still alive and had escaped to Siena. Now, Siena is one of my favorite places because it's just a little bit more crazy than other parts of Italy where we do have quite a few eccentricities. I recently barely avoided getting into some trouble there, which the Patreon supporters know all about. At the time of our narrative, Siena was still a republic, strenuously resisting the Florentine domination of all of Tuscany, and would have made a nice little addition to Cesare's duchy. Before he could, King Louis of France stepped in to tell him to keep his grubby paws off Siena, as the king was getting bogged down in the second phase of the Italian wars against the Spanish and was really starting to get worried about Borgia's growing power. Giampaolo Baglioni was safe for now. Cesare tried to get hold of another one of the main conspirators, Pandolfo Petrucci, who was holed up in another Tuscan city, Pisa, by setting up an ambush for him, but Petrucci managed to escape. It was at this point that Cesare was called urgently back to Rome. You will remember that among those assassinated at Senigallia, there were some Orsini, and the Orsini family were none too pleased. Faced with the overwhelming power of the Borgias, the Roman families of the Orsini, Colonna, and Savelli actually managed to get their act together, unify, and march on Rome. The Borgias, however, managed to fight off the threat and then started to discuss counter-moves, and that is when the change in the balance of power really started to show itself. In the past, Cesare had been the tool of his father's will, consulting with him and obeying his commands and following his strategy. It was now clear that Alexander had lost control of his now famous or notorious son, and their relationship had been reversed, with the Pope simply backing Cesare in the creation of his realm. There were heated arguments between the two, although some more suspicious observers suspected that this was just for show, so that Alexander could stay on France's good side. Cesare wanted to reform his duchy, to effect a tax reform, an agricultural reform, and a propaganda move to finance the reconstruction of private houses. All of this required cash, and Pope Daddy obliged in the usual ways. New cardinals were created, who showed their gratitude with heavy sums paid to the papal coffers. Those who had the misfortune to die would have all of their properties and assets seized and donated to the Holy Mother Church for a good cause. For example, when Cardinal Giovanni Michele died in April 1503, before even most of his family knew, the Pope's men were swarming around his palace, taking stuff, again for the glory of the Holy Mother Church. Meanwhile, the Borgias started up secret talks with the Spanish, who had won the decisive battle of Cerignola. Switching sides would have meant that the Borgias no longer had to keep their mitts off Bologna and Tuscany, which were under French protection. Cesare could potentially become duke of one of the largest duchies in Italy, maybe even a kingdom. Cesare was already living the life of a prince. Who could make a duke into a king? Well, a pope, of course. Said duke and said pope only had to stay long enough in good health and away from assassination plots. Then came August 1503. It was an exceedingly hot summer, stifling. At the very beginning of August, an owl fluttered down to the feet of the Pope, dead from heat stroke. Alexander took this as a bad omen, which put him in a very somber mood. Nevertheless, some days later, on the 5th of August, he accepted an invitation to dine in the hills of Rome at the home of one of his cardinals, Adriano Castellesi da Corneto, in the hopes of escaping from the heat of the city. The banquet was pleasant enough and also attended by Cesare. In the following days, the Pope fell ill with a very high intermittent fever. Within a week, Cesare also fell ill. The Pope was attended by his doctors and leeches were applied. He seemed to get better and even sat up to play cards with those attending him. Then, on the 18th of August, he took a turn for the worse. He was administered his last rites, and at the age of 72, Pope Alexander VI, Rodrigo Borgia, was dead. The death of Alexander and the illness of Cesare remains a mystery to this day. Had they really just fallen ill? Perhaps something to do with the oppressive heat, malaria or something? Had they been poisoned? If so, had the poison actually been intended for them, or had they been the ones to use one of their favorites, Cantarella, and had the goblets with the poison intended for others been mistakenly or intentionally switched? Shortly after his death, Alexander's body started to swell, deform, and emit a foul odor. He had to be pushed, pummeled, and shoved into his coffin, and due to the unbearable stench, very few attended his wake. For the critics of Borgia, this was proof that the lustful pontiff had been inhabited by a demon. Meanwhile, Cesare was still incapacitated by disease, but he did manage to get his faithful Winston Wolfe type Michelotto Corella to go and seize the papal treasure and get it out. The noble Roman families of the Caetani, Orsini, Savelli, and Colonna could now waltz back into Rome and take back their properties and possessions. Cesare managed to avoid total isolation by making a deal with the Colonna, but upon insistence he ended up having to leave the city shamefully transported on a stretcher. Things started to unravel. The French king Louis XII ditched the Borgias as an ally. The cities of Piombino, Perugia, Rimini, Urbino, Camerino, and Pesaro rebelled against his dominion. Cesare's only hope now was to get a friendly pope elected, or at least one that would not be outright hostile. The conclave was made up of 37 cardinals, 11 of whom were Spanish. A compromise pope was elected, the old, frail, and already ailing Sienese Francesco Tedeschi Piccolomini. He was the second of his family to wear the papal tiara after his uncle Pius II, and in his honor the nephew took the name of Pius III. Although he was a friend of the Borgia's arch-enemy, Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, he was not opposed to Il Valentino, so he really was sort of a compromise pope. With the papal situation momentarily sorted, it was at this point that Cesare, after years of proving himself to be an able political and military strategist, made his first real mistake. Instead of heading for his capital in Romagna and consolidating the situation there, where he could have resisted for quite a while, he decided to stay in Rome, which was becoming increasingly dangerous. He was attacked by the Orsini and managed to escape, hiding out at first in the Vatican and then in Castel Sant'Angelo. Meanwhile in Romagna, Guidobaldo da Montefeltro of Urbino and Venice were moving against Cesena and Rimini. In October, Pope Pius III, elected as a temporary transition pope, did his job a little too well and died after only 2 months, and once again, Cesare's best hope was to influence the conclave. At this point, there was a standoff. Giuliano della Rovere could not get elected pope without the support of Cesare Borgia. Cesare Borgia could find no candidate that could beat della Rovere. It is then that Cesare made his second great mistake. He trusted della Rovere, thinking that the cardinal could put all the animosity, the hate, and political maneuvering behind him and let bygones be bygones. Giuliano della Rovere, with the help of the votes influenced by the Borgias, became Pope Julius II. The Borgias' fragile hopes didn't last long at all. Cesare's younger brother, Geoffrey, faced with rising hostility in Rome, gathered the family in Castel Sant'Angelo and pointed the cannons at the increasingly aggressive crowds outside. The Pope took the opportunity of this act of aggression as an excuse to exile the Borgias from the city. Back in Romagna again, the Venetians were playing a clever little game, encouraging rebellions in the Borgia lands and then sending in their troops to quell the unrest, thus extending their influence. Julius started to worry about the growing power of the Serenissima and asked Cesare to give him control of the key fortresses in the area. Then, of course, he would give them back immediately. This was a brilliant move. If Cesare agreed, Julius could use his fortresses to oppose Venice and then just keep them. If Cesare refused, Julius had yet another excuse to get back at him. Cesare refused, Julius declared that he could not leave Rome and nominated a new governor of Romagna. The situation now accelerated and all areas of Borgia influence fell like dominoes. The last loyal troops were defeated before the year was out at Castiglione d'Arezzo. Cesare managed to escape Rome and seek refuge in Naples, but under continued pressure from the Pope and the family members of many of those he had crossed, he was carted off to Spain. In August 1504, Cesare Borgia landed in Leon, where in 1444, Alfonso Borgia, uncle of Rodrigo Borgia, had left Spain to start the Borgia adventure. Cesare remained a prisoner for over 2 years until he managed to escape in the most classical of methods. In October 1406, Il Valentino received a visit from his confessor, who also brought him a little present, a silken rope. On the 25th of October 1406, he tried to climb out of a tall tower. He was spotted before he could get down, and someone rushed to cut the rope, and he fell, hurting himself quite seriously, but still managing to make it to safety. At this point, Il Valentino started on one of the periods that so characterized and made him a formidable adversary. He became a ghost. He disappeared into the heart of Spain, popping up here and there, with reports of him also appearing in places he hadn't even been close to. Once again, no one knew where he was, nor where he would show up next. He finally ended up in Navarre, knocking on the door of his brother-in-law, brother of Charlotte d'Aubray, Cesare's more or less estranged wife. Now you may be wondering what said brother-in-law, the King of Navarre, thought about having one of the world's most wanted men showing up on his doorstep. But it just so happened that the king was facing a rebellion in his lands, and having a proven military mastermind seemed like a pretty good break. Cesare liked the idea, and all sorts of lights started going off inside his head. Could he use the army of Navarre to do in Spain something similar to what he had done in Romagna? Maybe he could then offer his services to Venice in their struggle against the Pope and get back his lands in Romagna. First things first, there was a rebellion in Navarre to put down. The first step was to lay siege to the castle of the Lord of Viana in February of 1507. As the siege drew on, those inside tried to have supplies delivered, and when the besiegers realized what was going on, Cesare led the attack on the relief party himself. It is at this point that Il Valentino made his third and last mistake. He got separated from his troops chasing a knight and suddenly found himself surrounded by enemies. Why had this seasoned soldier and great strategist, who had managed to keep a cool head in the most intense of situations, allowed himself to be led into the arms of the enemy? Had it really been a mistake caused by the heat of the moment, or had he realized that all his dreams of getting back on top were silly illusions, and he had seen a way, as Bon Jovi put it, to be shot down in a blaze of glory? Hopelessly outnumbered, he fought on out of desperation like a cornered animal. He was wounded by a pike and kept on fighting, killing 3 infantrymen before a group of enemy knights found them and finished him off. As the day drew to a close, Borgia's comrades started to search for him. Night fell, and he still hadn't been found. With the night came pelting rain and harsh winds. Cesare's body was not found until days later, and it was then that they were able to verify that he had been wounded 23 times before he had succumbed. He was laid to rest in the city of Pamplona. The Borgia dynasty would not end with him. Somewhere along the line, there would also be a Borgia who would become a saint. Then, of course, there was Lucrezia, still alive and doing a great job at being the Duchess of Ferrara. Never again, however, would a Borgia be feared and admired by so many. Never again would a Borgia hold the possible destiny of the peninsula in their hands. Cesare Borgia il Valentino, Duke of Romagna, was no more. Thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for the sketch after the credits. A History of Italy is a Sentire Media podcast produced by my wonderful Patreon supporters. Now, first of all, I'd like to apologize to a couple of Patreons who haven't been getting any kind of mention, despite the fact that they have been faithful supporters. So, apologies to Julian, Dr. Mario T, Heather M, Cospin Fanboy, Benjamin W, Dennis K, and Simon O. Apologies once again, I'm sorry for that, and please bear with me a second while I go through the Margherita Huck and Galileo Galilei list, and please let me know if you have been unjustly purged. So, Margherita Huck and Galileo Galilei is Alison H, Amanda D, Annie, Benjamin W, Karsten M, Catherine C, C Lane, Cindy M, Chris H, Cospia Fanboy, Dean V, Demetrio M, Dennis K, Dennis S, Dominic T, Edward J, Emily B, Eric W, Federica R, Gabriel S, Gunnar W, Heather M, Ignazio Il Valentino, James C, Jane T, Jeff M, Jeffrey W, John W, John Jordan C, Joshua G, Julia G, Justin E, Kyle D, Old John in Milwaukee, Linus, Mark P, Michus Porcius, Paradise, Patrizia K, Rocco B, Rod L, Russell F, Sandra P, Scott L, Sean M, Shelby, Shelley, Simon O, Stephen M, and Tap Dance Down Under. And of course, the tippy top, Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri level, Lisa K, Andrew M, Peter W, David L, David C, Sen, David A, Karen D, Helenka, Bridget, Dallas R, Joseph V, Stephen G, and Julian. Thank you, one and all, and please let me know if you have been unjustly non-mentioned or, even worse, purged from the lists. If you'd like to get in touch, go ahead. hello@ahistoryofitaly.com or on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time, arrivederci. Cesare, my son, you're finally here. I've sent for you repeatedly, and yet you choose to ignore me. You must be more obedient.
That is what I wish to talk up to you about.
What?
Things have changed. From now on, we are doing things my way.
What do you mean, Cesare? Are we not going to move against the Orsini?
I'm no longer Cesare. That's the first thing.
What?
From this point on, I will no longer be Cesare Borgia.
Well, who will you be then?
You must call me Happy Winkle Pretty Cheeks.
Happy Winkle Pretty Cheeks?
Yes, Father. And that's not all.
What else is there, Cesare?
Who?
I mean, Happy Winkle.
You can call me Happy for short.
Oh, how kind of you.
I know. The other thing is that I wish to choose my own socks from now on.
Your own socks?
Yes, I no longer wish to wear matching socks.
Ah.
Yes, it's curbing my ability to express my creativity. Leonardo da Vinci says so. No longer will I suffer the oppression of matching socks. Observe.
We look ridiculous.
Don't depress me. Do not clip my wings.
All right. The Happy Winkle. Mismatched socks it is that all?
I wish to change my diet.
Your diet?
Yes. From now on, I will survive solely on a turniparian diet.
A what?
A turniparian diet. I will eat only turnips.
Is that healthy?
Yes, I have made an in-depth study with my cook and dietitian and astrologer. For example, today the menu is turnip and venison. Tomorrow, venison and turnip. Friday is turnips and pheasants.
So, the exclusive turnip diet is just adding turnips to other stuff for every meal?
Are you trying to oppress me?
No. I'm partial to a nice turnip soup myself.
The turniparian philosophy does not include soups, Father. There can be no modification of the sacred form of the turnip.
No. Okay, right. Is that all? Can we discuss the strategy to counter the Roman nobility?
Later.
Why? Now what?
I have to go play with my dollies.
I give up.